titled Questions That Jesus Asked. And I've got the privilege to kick it off with the first question. And this is a question that Jesus asked of Peter. And he said to him, "Do you love me?" Okay, so we'll just read that. So it's John 21. And verses 15 to 17. John 21, 15 to 17. And I'm reading from the New Living Translation. So it says, after breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question. I've lost my... "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. A third time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." I mean, I can kind of understand why Peter would feel a bit hurt that Jesus kept asking him the same question 3 times. "Do you love me?" And he said, "Yeah, I love you." And then he asked him again, "Do you love me?" "Yes, I love you." And again, "Do you love me?" "I love you." But at the same time, I can appreciate that Peter was well known, wasn't he, for his impulsive reactions. You know, it was Peter that climbed out of the boat to walk on water in Matthew 14:28. And it seemed like a great time a great idea at the time until he saw the wind. And then he began to sink. Not sure how he saw the wind. I suppose he saw the effects of the wind, and then he started to sink. It was Peter that suggested that they should build 3 shelters for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah during the transfiguration. In Luke 9:32-33, it says, Peter and the others had fallen asleep, and when they woke up, they saw Jesus' glory and 2 men standing with him. As Moses and Elijah were starting to leave, Peter, not even knowing what he was saying, blurted out, "Master, it is wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Like, he'd completely missed the point of what was happening there. But it was about the experience for him rather than the reason that it was happening. Again, you could say quite an immature response. I suppose it's a little bit like, when, some of you will remember the Toronto blessing a long time ago. And, people were going all over the place just because they wanted to feel this blessing. They were missing the point. It wasn't about, they weren't seeking what God was doing, but they wanted the experience rather than to be changed on the inside. And, I think Peter was a bit like that in that passage we've just read. It was a bit like, oh, let's just stay here. It's so lovely. Then in John 13, Peter's at it again. As Jesus is washing the disciples' feet. And in verse 8, first of all, Peter is protesting. And he says to Jesus, "You will never, ever wash my feet," because he felt it was a job that was beneath Jesus. Because that was a job that a servant would do. Not a great teacher, as Jesus was. And so he was saying, you'll never, ever wash my feet. Again, he was completely missing the point. But as Jesus explained it to him, that unless he washed his feet, he wouldn't belong to him. Peter then, again, impulsively blurts out, "Well then, wash my hands and wash my head as well." Like, again, missing the point. It wasn't about, well, give me more of it then. It was a symbol that he completely missed. in his impulsivity. And then we've got the incident following the Last Supper as they're on the way to the Mount of Olives in Mark 14 and 27. He says, on the way, Jesus told them, all of you will desert me, for the scriptures say God will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised from the dead, I will go ahead of you to Galilee and meet you there. Peter said to him, even if everyone deserts you, I never will. And Jesus replied, I tell you the truth, Peter, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. You will deny 3 times that you even know me. No, Peter declared emphatically, even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you. But we know that he did. That very night, you know, in the afternoon or morning, whenever it was, he's going, even if everyone else does, I never will. I'll even die with you. And yet later that evening, 3 times he denied Jesus. So in some ways, I can understand why Jesus asked him 3 times. Because I'm sure if I was to ask you the same question, do you love me? Not me, but Jesus. If I was to ask you that same question, we would probably have the same response. We would go, yes, of course I love you. You know I love you. But you know what Jesus makes clear is that love is more than just lip service. It's more than just saying, yes, I love you, you know I love you. Anyone can do that. That's the easy part. The hard part is following it through and showing that love. John 14 and verse 15 says, if you love me, obey my commands. Matthew 22 and 37 to 39, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbour as yourself. It's not enough just to say, yes, Lord, you know I love you. So what does that look like? What does it look like to love God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul? What does that look like? To me, that sounds like a pretty big deal. It's not. It's more than just going, yeah, you know I love you. It's about showing that love. And I think the two go in hand. The loving God and the loving your neighbour, they go hand in hand. They can't be separated. You know, if we love God with all our heart and soul and mind, our lives are going to be centred around doing what pleases him. They're going to be lives of worship continuously, not just on a Sunday morning. You can't kind of dip out and dip in. You know, if you love somebody, you love them continuously, don't you? You don't just fall out of love with them for 6 days a week and then for 1 day a week you're back in love with them. You're either in love with them or you're not. So what is important to God should also be important to us. How did Jesus show the Father's love? You know, everything he did was for the Father. And the way that he did that was showing people, he taught them, and he taught them the way, and he showed them how they should be living by what he said, but he also showed them by what he did. He was interested in people. You know, he was the one that noticed Zacchaeus up in the tree where nobody else wanted to know him. They'd ostracised him because of being a terrible tax collector. But Jesus noticed him and said, I'm coming to your house. And that act of showing kindness completely transformed his life. You know, you remember the story of the woman with an issue of blood, you know, where everybody else would have stayed clear of her because she was unclean. You know, when she touched the hem of Jesus' garment, he wasn't angry with her, he had compassion on her. So that's how he showed the Father's love, was the way he treated people. It was the things that he said. It was healing those that were in need. It was meeting those needs, whether they were physical or emotional or whatever. And ultimately it was through his sacrifice, as we've been reminded this morning. How much do we sacrifice? I mean, thankfully, we're not required to hang on a cross. We don't need to do that, but we do need to give our lives. You know, we sing about it, and again, it's easy for it to trip off the tongue, isn't it? But how much sacrifice do we actually offer? 1 John and chapter 3, verse 16, it says, we know what real love is because Jesus gave up his life for us. But so we ought to give up our lives for our brothers and sisters. If someone has enough money to live well and sees a brother or sister in need but shows no compassion, how can God's love be in that person? Dear children, let's not merely say that we love each other. Let us show the truth by our actions. Our actions will show that we belong to the truth. So we will be confident when we stand before God. Even if we feel guilty, God is greater than our feelings and he knows everything. Dear friends, if we don't feel guilty, we can come to God with bold confidence and we will receive from him whatever we ask because we obey him and do the things that please him. And this is his commandment. We must believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another just as he commanded us. Those who obey God's commandments remain in fellowship with him and he with them. And we know he lives in us because the Spirit he gave lives in us. So if we say we love God, are we showing it by loving our neighbours? Are we showing it by living lives of worship? When Jesus said, feed my sheep, take care of my sheep, I think that's what he was talking about. He was talking about the spiritual food, but also the physical food. You know, he was meeting their needs. You know, we need to be encouraging each other. That's part of our love for each other. Yes, we need to, if we see somebody in need, we need to be moved by that. We need to have compassion. And if we can help, we shouldn't even be wondering whether we should help. We should be helping. But also we need to be discipling each other and encouraging each other. And, you know, particularly the next generation. Yeah, they're the lambs. Jesus, again, led by example. You know, he was concerned with both. He spent a lot of his time, that 3 years in ministry, a lot of that time was teaching. It was teaching his disciples. The next generation, he was teaching them how to live and what they needed to do. He was teaching the crowds and showing them the love of God, but also the authority and the power that had been given to him in healing and all the signs and wonders that he showed. But he also gave them physical food. When you think of the feeding of the 4,000 and the feeding of the 5,000, he was concerned with their physical needs as well. It was all of it. They go hand in hand. You can't separate them. I came across this article this week, and it was William Booth's last speech to the Salvation Army. And he said, "While women weep, as they do now, I'll fight. While children go hungry, as they do now, I'll fight. While men go to prison, in and out, as they do now, I'll fight. While there is a drunkard left, while there is a poor lost girl upon the streets, while there remains one dark soul without the light of God, I'll fight. I'll fight to the end." That really moved me reading that. I just thought, yeah, you understood what this was about. It was about feeding the church spiritually, but it was also about meeting those physical needs. So going back to one of these scriptures, it talked about, as we stand before God, that we can come with him with confidence, but we must believe in the name of Jesus Christ and love one another as he commanded. So, I want to ask you, when it comes to the end of your time on earth and you stand before God, how will you evidence your love for him? Will you say, well, I went to church every Sunday, and some of those services were really long, like you don't understand. But is that enough? Is it enough to say I went to church? I was faithful every Sunday. I used to say I've been going to church 9 months longer than I actually existed, because my dad was a Baptist minister, so I kind of was born into the church, and that's great, but it's not enough. How will you show your love for God? What about the other 6 days of the week? How do you spend your time? How do you show your worship to God? Are you following those 2 commands? Are you loving him with all your heart, all your soul and all your mind? And are you loving your neighbour as yourself? I was talking to Gary probably about a month ago, and I was just saying it would be a really interesting thing to do with our young people, to say, right, for a period of time, whatever it is, I want you to treat other people exactly as you would like them to treat you. So, if you would like people to every 5 minutes be going, could I get you a drink, or if that's what you would like to see, then that's how you treat other people. But that's exactly what the Bible says. But it's not actually what we do, is it? We don't necessarily treat people the way that we want to be treated. We want people to treat us that way, but we don't actually want to do it ourselves. But that's not loving our neighbour in that way. I really felt, as well as I was preparing this, we've got to step up in feeding the next generation. We've been asking for a long time for people to help out with, on a Sunday morning, with the children up there. And, I get it. My children are grown up now, and I'm like, yeah, I've done that now. But, God really moved me a while ago that, when my children were getting to the stage where they, didn't want to come to church or whatever, I was like, okay, or they didn't want to go to the youth group, I was like, okay, we'll go together. And, some evenings they'd be going, oh, I don't want to go. And I go, well, I'm going anyway. So you're going to have to come, because you can't stay at home on your own. So, worked really well. But, just maybe God's been prompting you to put your name forward. If there was loads of us doing it, then you wouldn't have to do it that much. But I get that for some of you that is a big sacrifice because you've been there, you've done that, and you've got the T-shirt. But what a privilege to be part of the next generation, to be feeding them. And even if you are not able to do that, engage with our young people. Speak to them. Have a conversation with them. They'll probably look at you like, whoa, why are you talking to me? But, show an interest in them. Because we need to feed his lambs if we claim that we love him. I just want to finish by reading from Matthew 25. And it's verse 31 to 46. Matthew 25, verse 31 to 46. He says, "But when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me.' Then these righteous ones will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will say, 'I tell you the truth. When you did it for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it for me.' Then the king will turn to those on the left and say, 'Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, and you didn't give me a drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked, and you didn't give me clothing. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't visit me.' Then they will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and not help you?' And he will answer, 'I tell you the truth. When you refused to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were refusing to help me.' And they will go away into eternity, into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life." Well, that's a bit sobering, isn't it? So I'm going to end with the same question I started with. Jesus asks you, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you truly love me? Then feed my lambs.